For decades, it lay hidden, behind glass, beneath velvet, guarded not just by palace walls, but by silence. Diana's sapphire ring wasn't just a symbol of royal romance. It was a relic of obsession, betrayal, and something far more disturbing. When it resurfaced decades later for a routine examination, no one could have predicted what the sapphire would say back. It began, as so many things in the House of Windsor do, with an image, an engagement photo. Diana Spencer, just 19, sitting beside the then Prince Charles, her hand awkwardly displayed, wearing a sapphire so large it seemed to carry its own gravity. A 12-carat Ceylon sapphire, haloed in 14 diamonds, set in 18-carat white gold. But this wasn't a family heirloom. It wasn't plucked from the Queen Mother's vaults or passed down through centuries of royal brides. No, Diana had chosen it herself, from a Gerard catalogue. It was a decision that rattled tradition. Some said it was too big, too bright, too blue. Others whispered it was too common, too accessible to the public. But Diana, even then, knew how to make a statement. She wasn't just choosing a ring. She was choosing a warning. The ring became iconic, a visual echo of a love story already unraveling beneath the surface. It glittered during the highest highs, state dinners, royal tours, appearances that crafted the fairy tale. But it was also there in the lowest lows, silent during tears, cold during betrayal, watching almost. Diana wore it not like an ornament, but like a weight, a reminder. And when her marriage collapsed and her title was stripped, she still kept the ring, as if parting with it would be parting with the final piece of her own truth. After her death in 1997, the ring disappeared from public view. Official records claimed it was returned to the royal collection, but behind closed doors, it moved again. Two young boys, William and Harry, were allowed to select something of their mother's to keep. William, still reeling, chose her Cartier watch. Harry asked for the sapphire ring. Years later, they'd quietly trade. William, preparing to propose to Catherine, needed something powerful, emotional, and unforgettable. Harry let it go. The ring surfaced once more, placed on Kate Middleton's finger, igniting headlines around the world. The heir giving the future queen his mother's most iconic piece, a symbol of continuity, renewal. And yet, even then, something was off. The ring never left royal grounds, never entered public auctions, never underwent authentication or examination. No modern jeweler had ever been allowed to inspect it. It remained unscanned, untested, untouched. Security personnel were reportedly warned never to let it out of sight during official events. When Catherine traveled, it was said to stay locked in a private pouch, never checked in, never exposed to airport machinery. The official reason? Security. The unofficial reason? Something else. Whispers began to swirl through the palace halls, through the staff who carried trays and ironed gowns. The ring, some said, was cursed. Others claimed it hummed when held. That Diana once said, "It knows everything." The sapphire, after all, had been with her through more than just romance. It had seen the lies, the cold stares, the betrayal that cut far deeper than tabloids ever reported. Some insiders believed it held more than memory. It held her fear, her intuition, a trapped scream that never got out. And yet, for all its mystery, no one dared question it. No one examined it. Until now. But when a routine royal inventory was quietly ordered after Queen Elizabeth's passing, someone finally dared to examine the sapphire. And what they found was more than jewelry. The laboratory was sworn to secrecy, its analysts barred from knowing what they were testing. But when one technician traced the crystalline structure and found organic residue, protocol shattered. Because what lay trapped in the sapphire wasn't just history, it was heredity. The request had arrived with little warning, cloaked in layers of protocol and mystery. A royal courier, diplomatic passport, no name given. Inside the secure case, a velvet-wrapped ring, delicate, dazzling, and unmistakable. But there was no fanfare, no explanation. Only strict instructions: inspect for microfractures, assess gemstone stability, and return immediately. No photographs, no replicas, no discussion. The lab, a discreet private facility outside Geneva, known for handling priceless artifacts and state-level relics, had worked with monarchies before, but never like this. To the technicians, it was just another day, another ancient jewel, another cryptic brief from a palace trying to protect its image. The ring was scanned, its surface mapped in high resolution. But it was the internal mapping, using a high-frequency spectroscope, that triggered the first alarm. Deep inside one of the sapphire's naturally occurring crevices, there appeared to be something else. A smear. Tiny. Unassuming. Initially assumed to be accumulated skin oil or environmental debris. A non-issue. But protocol dictated all anomalies be logged, extracted, and tested. And so it was. The technician tasked with analysis, young, meticulous, and stubbornly curious, ran a standard organic compound breakdown. Expected components, fatty acids, trace salts, maybe even perfume residues. What emerged instead were strands of degraded but intact DNA. Human, traceable, repeatable. For a moment, the lab froze. Had someone handled the ring without gloves? Had the contamination come from inside the lab? A second sample was retrieved. Same result? Now it wasn't just an anomaly. It was a breach. Not of protocol, but of silence. A second lab was discreetly contacted. No details provided. Just the sample. Confirmation came within 48 hours. Yes, it was DNA. Yes, it was human. Yes, it appeared to be decades old. But more than that, it contained markers that aligned suspiciously close to royal genomic patterns already leaked in various medical databases over the years. The technician, no longer calm, made the call they were dreading. Geneva rang London. The call didn't go to the royal jeweler. It went higher, much higher. What followed was swift, brutal, and cloaked in silence. The lab was instructed to destroy the remaining samples. Every computer that touched the file was scrubbed. Internal emails were pulled. 2 technicians were rotated off project indefinitely. But the question remained, how had DNA ended up inside a sapphire ring? And more chillingly, whose was it? But instead of answers, the palace issued a complete lockdown. And someone inside the firm began to quietly disappear from public view. She'd been Diana's dresser, her confidant, and one of the last people to touch the sapphire before Paris. But after the DNA discovery, she was abruptly retired. Her flat cleared, her name wiped from service records. What had she seen? What had she known about the ring? Within palace walls, she was known only as Mrs. H. Never seen in photographs, never quoted by press, but always there, just beyond the frame of Diana's life. She wasn't staff. She was shadow. A quiet presence in the background of chaos. She zipped the gowns, arranged the pearls, wiped the tears. Mrs. H. was the one Diana called at midnight, the one who took dictation for letters never sent, and the one who knew exactly which drawer was always locked. She never asked questions. She only listened. And Diana, feeling the walls closing in during those final years, confided in her more than anyone realized. The night before Paris, Mrs. H was the one who laid out the travel wardrobe. She pressed the navy linen, packed the shoes, and unlocked the velvet case holding Diana's sapphire ring. Though Diana wasn't planning to wear it, not this trip, she insisted it come with her. It was returned to the velvet pouch, polished gently by Mrs. H, who, by all available records, was the last person to handle it. She zipped it into a discreet side pocket of Diana's handbag, with no one else present. After the crash, when the world plunged into mourning and the monarchy scrambled to control the narrative, Mrs. H did something unexpected. She disappeared. Not into retirement, not into grief, into silence. She refused every media request. She skipped the memorials. Friends said she stopped answering letters. Even longtime colleagues admitted they hadn't heard from her. The woman who had shared Diana's most vulnerable moments had vanished, as if instructed to forget the princess ever existed. Years passed, and then, just days after the Geneva lab reported its findings, Mrs. H's name reappeared briefly, buried in a footnote of an internal staff report. She had been formally retired. Her severance? Unusually generous. Her pension? Doubled. Her palace apartment? Vacated overnight. The exit was clean, sanitized, quiet, too quiet. Her name was removed from staff logs, her ID credentials deactivated. A career erased in less than 72 hours. No announcement, no thank you, no trace. But it raised a haunting question. What had she known about the ring? And when had she known it? A private investigator hired by an independent journalist uncovered one unsettling detail. In the official logs, Mrs. H's fingerprint was the last registered on the ring's case before Diana's death. There was no indication it had been handled by anyone else until William retrieved it years later. So if the sapphire held more than beauty, if it carried evidence, if it had been tampered with, then Mrs. H may have been the only one who had seen it and said nothing. But even as she vanished from public record, her daughter left behind something. An anonymous letter, buried in legal documents, hinting that the sapphire had been tampered with long before the crash. DNA doesn't lie, but it can be inconvenient. Because what the lab found inside Diana's sapphire wasn't just her, it was someone else. And the profile didn't match anyone officially recorded in the royal family tree. The lab's report was supposed to be routine, clean, a procedural check in the wake of Queen Elizabeth's passing, part of a discreet recataloguing of royal heirlooms. But as the analysts sifted through the organic sample found in the microscopic crevice of the sapphire, a second genetic signature emerged, unexpected, distinct, and chillingly close. The first profile was almost immediately identifiable. Fragments of Diana's mitochondrial DNA, consistent with her known lineage. It was unsettling enough to find it there, dormant and buried. But the second profile raised alarms. A partial Y chromosome sequence, male. Strong markers of genetic proximity, close enough to suggest a sibling or a son. Initial reactions ranged from disbelief to bureaucratic panic. The possibility of contamination was floated first. It had to be a fluke, a stray fingerprint, a lab error, even sabotage. But when the sample was retested, isolated, and confirmed across two independent facilities, that excuse crumbled. The DNA didn't belong to William. It didn't belong to Harry. And it didn't match any other registered male relative of Diana, living or deceased. In fact, no match surfaced at all. Not in UK national medical registries, not in royal security databases, not in global ancestry archives. It was a ghost, genetically related, undeniably real, and officially non-existent. Behind palace walls, chaos erupted in silence. Meetings were held. Emails vanished. Archivists were summoned to search through decades of medical records, private letters, and sealed hospital logs. But all roads led nowhere. The only certainty was this: someone else's blood was on that ring. Someone the monarchy had never acknowledged. That kind of revelation doesn't stay buried for long. Within days, whispers leaked. Whispers that Diana may have harbored a secret even more explosive than her own confessions on tape. Had she given birth to another child? Was there a pregnancy hidden behind the veil of royal denial? Some pointed to the gaps in her calendar during the mid-80s, months at a time when she vanished from public life, citing stress, exhaustion, rest. Others recalled her own cryptic words in interviews, her strange references to "what I gave up." And then there were the stories that never made print. Staff who recalled unexplained packages, long phone calls made from secure palace lines, a small photo once glimpsed in her wallet that didn't match either of her sons. Online forums exploded. Amateur sleuths combed through Diana's biographies, trying to match timelines, secret friendships, even facial features of known royal associates. Rumors took root. Had there been a child born in secret? Had he been taken, hidden, erased? And if so, who orchestrated the disappearance? Had it been Charles? The Queen? Or had Diana made the choice herself, out of fear? Theories ranged from tragic to sinister. Was it an affair covered up with royal precision, a forced adoption, or something darker, something orchestrated by an institution obsessed with controlling bloodlines? Every possible answer came with more questions, and the sapphire, once a symbol of fairy tale romance, now pulsed with a new meaning. It wasn't just a jewel, it was a relic of deception, a carrier of DNA, and, perhaps, a confession no one had dared utter aloud. And then came the second shock, because someone else recognized the genetic sequence. Someone who wasn't supposed to see it. He had worn the sapphire on his bride's finger. It was his mother's memory, his legacy. But now it was something else. When William learned of the lab report, he didn't confront the crown. He went rogue. And what he found would break him. The message came through a back channel. Not through the palace, not through an aide, but from someone he barely remembered. An old friend of his mother's who still had connections in Europe. The words were brief, coded, and terrifying. There's something inside the ring. It's not just hers. At first, William dismissed it as another conspiracy theory, one of the thousands that had haunted his family since Diana's death. But something in the tone unsettled him. It wasn't a plea for attention. It was a warning. He moved quietly. No staff, no press. Just a single private flight to Geneva, under the radar, coordinated through a security contractor with ties to multiple embassies. At the lab, he wore no title. He didn't arrive as the Prince of Wales. He arrived as a son. The director of the facility met him behind locked doors. What followed was not speculation. It was science. The DNA fragments, the dual profiles, the impossibility of contamination, the probability that the ring had carried this secret for more than 25 years. When the results were shown to him, William didn't speak. He simply lowered his head, rested his hand on the table, and stared at the screen. The ring had always been sacred to him. It had carried the weight of grief, the promise of continuity. Now it felt like betrayal. He signed the non-disclosure agreement without reading it, not because he feared the consequences, but because the implications were already too large to contain. Back in London, he returned not to his public duties, but to Diana's archive. There was a room, sealed and secured, filled with her personal effects, managed by the royal collection, but never opened since her death. Inside were boxes of letters, recordings, and journals. William asked for no assistance. He searched alone, and after 2 nights with no rest, he found what he hadn't known he was looking for. It was a page, torn from one of her diaries, handwritten, fragile, and buried inside an envelope marked "Not for the Boys." On it, Diana had scrawled just one line: "They will never let him live free." No context, no name, just fear, just guilt, and finality. That night, William didn't sleep. He didn't speak to anyone. He stared at the ring in a velvet case beside his bed, a ring that once symbolized love and now throbbed with questions. Was his mother trying to protect someone? Had the palace hidden more than just its sins? They had hidden someone's life? He knew what was expected of him: silence, loyalty, duty. But something deeper burned in him now. The truth had a heartbeat, and it was getting louder. But just as William considered burying the truth, Catherine uncovered something that made that impossible. Tucked beneath the satin lining, sealed and undated, was a letter in Diana's hand. Catherine only found it because she sensed something strange, something off about the ring. What she read was never meant to see daylight. It began subtly, a feeling she couldn't shake. Every time Catherine wore the sapphire, something felt wrong. Not physically, emotionally. She'd worn royal jewels before, far grander, far heavier. But this one was different. It didn't sparkle. It stared. At first, she chalked it up to pressure, to the immense weight of symbolism that came with wearing what had once been Diana's. But then came the dreams, strange, fragmented, repeating. The same sentence whispered over and over. Look where they hid it. That morning, Catherine removed the ring before an event, something she rarely did, and placed it back in its original case, one that had long sat tucked away, untouched since Diana's death. That's when she noticed it. A seam, barely visible, along the inner edge of the velvet lining. It hadn't been stitched properly. Her fingers, guided more by instinct than curiosity, slipped beneath the fabric. And there it was. A folded scrap of paper, brittle with time, hidden in the hollow space beneath. No envelope, no date. Just Diana's unmistakable handwriting, faint and jagged, as if it had been written in haste. Or fear. The note was short, devastating. If this ever resurfaces, tell the truth. For him. For the one I couldn't keep safe. No name, no location. But it was a confession all the same. A plea that had never reached its destination. Until now. Catherine's hands trembled as she read it again, trying to decipher more between the lines. The words weren't angry. They weren't grand. They were quiet, desperate, maternal, and final. She didn't wait. That night, she confronted William. The moment he saw the letter, he knew. The Geneva lab, the torn diary page, the unspeakable theory that had been creeping into his mind for weeks now. There was no escaping it anymore. Someone had existed. Someone Diana had feared for. Someone she had protected in silence. Catherine didn't ask if it was real. She asked what he was going to do about it. William faltered. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. The truth was corrosive. It didn't just threaten reputations, it threatened the monarchy's entire mythology. To admit Diana had hidden a child, or even attempted to, would unravel decades of tightly managed legacy. But Catherine didn't blink. She told him it wasn't about titles. It was about humanity, about dignity, about a mother who had been hunted by her own palace and had left behind breadcrumbs, A diary page, a hidden letter, a buried identity. And so, Catherine made her decision. If William wouldn't act, she would. Because the world adored Diana, mourned Diana, wept for her memory, but they had never been given her full story. They had been fed versions wrapped in silk and silence. This, Catherine believed, was the truth Diana had fought to preserve in secret, a truth the public deserved to hear. But the monarchy had already anticipated this and launched a campaign of distraction, destruction, and denial. Leaks, disinformation. Suddenly, every tabloid focused on Catherine's wardrobe, William's mood, and Harry's latest headline. But behind the noise was a quiet erasure campaign to kill the story before it ever breathed. The counterattack wasn't loud. It didn't come with press conferences or declarations. It came like smoke, silent, suffocating, and everywhere at once. Within 48 hours of Catherine's discovery, the palace's media apparatus spun into overdrive. Senior press officers were summoned at dawn. Schedules were redrawn. Appearances were staged. Suddenly, William and Catherine were everywhere. At children's hospitals, charity luncheons, royal openings, smiling, laughing, performing normalcy with the precision of trained diplomats. But the timing was no coincidence. It was containment. It was choreography. The public was distracted with shallow headlines. Tabloids published glowing spreads on Catherine's regal composure, breaking down the cost of her shoes, the color of her coat. Social media erupted with clips of William joking with schoolchildren. Yet, just beneath the surface, another story was building. One the crown could not allow to escape. And so it moved to destroy it. The first strike was calculated. A smear article surfaced in 2 major UK papers, claiming that the Geneva lab involved in the Sapphire analysis had been under scrutiny for inaccurate results and unauthorized leaks. The sources were unnamed, the facts unverifiable. But the damage was immediate. Trust was fractured. The lab's reputation, once pristine, was now stained in doubt. Next, an internal aide, one known to have handled artifacts from Diana's archive, suddenly resigned. No explanation. No interview. A quiet departure wrapped in euphemism. To pursue other interests. But insiders noted the golden parachute, an exit package worth more than a decade of service. Hush money, some whispered. A message to others. Stay quiet, or be erased. Palace staff were called into closed-door briefings. Phones were collected. Documents reviewed. Loyalty was not requested. It was demanded. One insider later claimed that the phrase, "This never happened," was repeated more than a dozen times in a single meeting. When someone asked about Catherine's letter, Diana's note hidden in the ring box, they were told it was a family matter. No further questions allowed. And then came the warning to the couple themselves. William and Catherine were advised, under the pretense of safety, to step back from royal engagements. Security concerns, they were told. Public pressure. But the real message was unmistakable. Fall back in line, or watch the institution fight back harder. For William, the ultimatum cut deep. But for Catherine, it only fueled the fire. She didn't retreat. She didn't freeze. Instead, she reached for her own weapon, the truth. Quietly, without protocol, she contacted a journalist. Not a sensationalist, not someone hungry for scandal, someone she trusted, someone who had once interviewed her in confidence and kept their word. She didn't give them the full story, not yet, but she handed them a thread, a lead, a name, enough to start digging. Because Catherine knew this wasn't just about a sapphire or a lost child. It was about power and silence, And who gets to decide which stories are buried and which are told? And that journalist would risk everything to publish what the palace feared most: the existence of a hidden heir. He'd lived without a title, without a home, without a name that meant anything. But now the world would learn that Diana had tried to protect a second child, and that child was still alive. It started as a whisper, an online post buried in the corner of a forgotten blog, citing a source close to the lab and a set of initials. Within hours, it was picked up by a fringe podcast. Then came the article. No photos, no direct quotes, just facts. Raw, terrifying. A covert exposé, published at midnight by a journalist known for surviving lawsuits and silencing threats. The headline was simple, but world-shattering. The lost heir, Diana's second son, confirmed by DNA. The story claimed that during a 3-month disappearance in the mid-1980s, Princess Diana had given birth. Not in London, not in any known facility, but abroad, off-record, hidden under the guise of a private retreat for mental health. The child, the piece alleged, had been placed into care under a false name. He'd never appeared in public, never had a royal title. His existence had been buried in paperwork, sealed files, and a trail of misdirection orchestrated by those sworn to protect the monarchy's image at any cost. The reasons? Unclear. Some speculated it was the result of an affair, perhaps with a trusted bodyguard. Others hinted at something more sinister: the crown itself deciding Diana was not fit to raise another heir. But the article didn't make accusations. It didn't need to. It had the proof. Embedded in the final paragraphs was the detail that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace: genetic confirmation, with a 99.9% maternal match to Diana Spencer. The data had been submitted anonymously to an international genetic database by someone who had no idea who he truly was. Until now. It matched the DNA embedded in the Sapphire, matched the archives quietly pulled from royal records, and matched what Catherine had found in that letter beneath the velvet lining. The man's name wasn't released. His image wasn't shared. But the world knew he existed. A single quote, brief, powerful, and heartbreaking, was published in the journalist's follow-up. "I don't want a crown. I just want the truth." The words broke the dam. Within hours, the internet detonated. Diana DNA trended across platforms. Commentators called it the biggest royal revelation since the abdication crisis. News anchors debated the moral rot of hiding a child to preserve an institution. Protesters gathered outside the gates, holding candles, photos of Diana, and signs demanding accountability. And yet, the palace said nothing. No press release, no denial, just silence. But that silence spoke louder than any statement. Behind the iron gates, power was shifting, not just in public perception, but in the bloodline itself. Because in the monarchy's cold heart, lineage is everything. And the emergence of a shadow heir wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a battle for legacy. They tried to silence her in life. They tried to own her memory in death. But Diana left something behind that even the crown couldn't destroy. The truth, etched in sapphire, and a name no longer forgotten. The reaction was immediate and fractured. Loyalists closed ranks, calling the revelation fabrication, a modern myth stitched together by grief and gossip. Others, louder and growing by the hour, demanded accountability. Phone lines to MPs lit up. Opinion columns split down the middle. In living rooms and pubs, the same question echoed. If this is true, what else have they hidden? The palace held its line, no confirmation, no denial, while the country argued with itself, torn between tradition and truth. In Parliament, the impossible was suddenly discussable. Motions were floated to open sealed royal archives, to review decades-old medical logs, to examine the quiet gaps in official calendars. The language was careful, cautious, but the meaning was clear. The story had crossed a line from rumor to reckoning. And once that threshold is crossed, it never fully closes again. Then came the moment that stunned even seasoned observers. Catherine stepped out for a public engagement and wore the sapphire. For the first time since the revelation, there it was, unmistakable. Not as a declaration of victory, not as defiance, as acknowledgement. The ring no longer pretended to be only a love story. It had become a witness, a reminder that memory can be curated, but evidence endures. William followed with words that sounded rehearsed, but landed like a confession. In a brief address, he spoke of duty and continuity, then paused. "Family," he said, "is more than bloodlines we choose to recognize." It was cryptic, careful, but it cracked the door. Those listening heard the subtext. The past cannot be disowned without cost. The hidden heir remained unseen. No interviews, no photographs, just silence, and a single letter released through counsel reaffirming a refusal of titles, a rejection of spectacle. That restraint did more than any press tour could have. It transformed him into a symbol, not of ambition, but of Diana's defiance, of a mother's choice to protect life over legacy. In the end, the ring returned to the vault. The locks clicked shut. The ledgers were updated. But the meaning had changed forever. It was no longer a symbol of romance or fairy tales. It was evidence. It was proof that the truth can be carried quietly for decades and still break free. Because in the House of Windsor, jewels may be silent, but history never stays buried forever.